We're back. Another another episode of Live with Rob and Cale, or Cale and Rob. We still haven't really figured that order out. We may never figure that order out. But today we have a special guest. Erik, thank you so much for joining us today. You have a crazy background, and you've kind of been everywhere and done everything in the education sector. So I'm just going to kind of read off the note here of your background. And Erik and I had the pleasure of working together as well when I was in high school, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But I'm thrilled to have Erik Ellefsen, Director of Networks and Improvements at the School of Education at Baylor University. Erik manages the Christian Leadership Transformation Project, equipping educators nationwide to improve schools and promote student success. With over 2 decades in education, Erik has been a teacher, coach, consultant, dean of academics, principal, grievance chairman, and leader in the EdTech space. He currently serves as the Senior Fellow of Center for Advancement of Christian Education and hosts a digital education podcast as well. Erik holds degrees from Boston University and Wheaton College, and today he's going to share some insights on how AI is going to impact education. So Erik, thank you.
Cale, Rob, great to be with you. Thanks for the invitation. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, no problem.
That was a long list there. I was trying to think, is there something that Erik didn't do in education? So I was trying to hear the titles. And
Well, so Erik and I go back to our days in San Jose, California. I went to high school there, and Tyson and I were both, Tyson's my brother. Yeah. Tyson's a hockey player. I was a golfer, and Erik was helping he was helping with everything, but really the student athletes as well, trying to place them into colleges. And my brother left home at an early age. So Erik was kind of instrumental in the relationship between my parents, my brother, and getting him off to play pro hockey. So
interesting.
That's where it all kind of started. And since then it's become more of a friendship than anything else. So
cool.
Well, I think like Cale, you missed the part of the story. Obviously, definitely had the opportunity to work with your brother and watch him go off and do those things. But I got to know you in like 7th grade, I think it was, where your dad brought you into my office at the high school. And he's like, okay, this one's different than the other one. and like secretly people called him the mayor. And whether that was public or not, but it was incredible. Like I think about those days fondly. An incredible journey and amazing to watch if you let it in the education space, to go from a place of, hey, had the opportunity to be your counselor, but then become friends, and then even now colleagues in the good work. Yeah. And so it's pretty amazing to watch. And it's, for me, I look at it and I'm like, hey, it's good to get old.
Yeah, that's it feels like it's been forever, but it also feels like yesterday in a weird way. So you've obviously you're still in San Jose, based in San Jose, but you're now at Baylor. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing at the university?
Yeah, so at Baylor University, they reestablished maybe about right before COVID, maybe now going back about 6 years, they reestablished a center on campus in the education leadership department called the Center for School Leadership. And so I started working with them during COVID to do some contract work as the work just kind of went virtual. And the opportunity to really look at, one, how do we do leadership well? How do we do leadership better? How do we do leadership more comprehensively? That, whether you're in an official title of school leadership or whether you're in the classroom, we kind of look at you as a leader of people. And so how can we marshal the professional capacity of high quality educators to step into a place of improvement, innovation, and just opportunities for students, and as we grow those. And then I do a lot of work around adaptive change in education, where it's some of the stuff that we're dealing with, and we talk about AI today, we talk about some other things, it's really, really hard to change. And so how do we walk a process of change, and how do we go from just, kind of just behaviors of change to really deep, significant change that results in better outcomes for students?
Right.
So Erik, how are you mentioned sort of working with are looking for better outcomes. So what's the KPI for you? Like, what do you look at? How do you sit back and go, okay, I've affected change and I can, see it here.
Yeah, I mean, in education, we're great at the anecdotal, right? The stories, like even the relationship with Cale is a great anecdotal, like, hey, here's success. And we love to tell the stories of. I think some of it is, we have a metric and we have some research called collective leadership. And so then we do research on collective leadership that we now know is tied to greater collective teacher efficacy. And not to get all wonky on you, but collective teacher efficacy is the number one driver to student outcomes and student results. And so for us, as we look at leadership and doing leadership different, how can we drive collective leadership that then drives efficacy, that then drives student outcomes? And then we work a lot of times, some schools have defined, like, hey, here's the outcomes we need. Right now, I'm working with on an improvement community with about 15 schools in Canada, and one of the kind of the outcome measures that they're using is just a Canadian, state measure for well-being and engagement of students in the classroom and in life. And so we look for what's already existing to help us drive to better understandings of just kind of student success.
So it's interesting because you're at a higher level of, like, you're dealing with older kids is what I'm trying to get at. In elementary school, middle school, even high school, you want to hear students' feedback to an extent, right? Because I remember all my friends, all they would do is complain, right? Homework assignment, complain, test, complain. Like, you wouldn't get any positive feedback. But I actually have talked with another one of your colleagues that's in the sports space in education and looking to get feedback from students in real time. We had a student on a couple weeks ago to get his thoughts on AI in education from the classroom. So in the work that you do in upper education, do you go to students for feedback as well? Is that
Yeah, so even though my work is primarily focused in on working with school leaders and educators now as adults, we want to drive everything that they do down towards what do we know about the student experience and what do we know about student outcomes.
right?
And so, so that's one of the things I think there is this challenge, right? And it's humbling for me as an educator who probably in my early days wasn't great at getting feedback.
Right.
I didn't always want to hear like what people thought about what was happening in my classroom. And I should have been more humble. And I think I've grown in my humility over time. But what we want to do is we want to create, and especially healthy schools, and we see this in healthy schools, high level of trust, high level of personalization where we care about each kid, not all kids, not some kids, but each kid.
Right.
And we want to hear and we want to understand what that experience and what those outcomes look like for each of those students. And so the more we can get feedback from even a kindergartner on their experience and
Right.
about how they're doing in their progress, all the way up to a senior in high school who maybe is just ready to be done. We want to get that feedback, create those feedback loops so that then we get better at our work and that we include not just so we can do, and I think this is a really neat thing about what AI could probably do for us. So we can better personalize the experience to you as a student and as an emerging, person, like, hey, here's what I care about. Here's what I'm interested in.
Right.
Here's what I need to get better at, but here's what I'm also really good at.
Right.
So if you had to create, education and change don't go well together sometimes. People are stuck in their way, right? I think that's in every workforce is probably fair to say, but education is one of them. And did you have to create a whole policy around what you can and can't do with AI and how you can use it? Like, are you guys still working through that? Like, what are the rules and regs around sort of what you can do with AI?
Yeah, so the nice thing for us is we don't have to create that stuff.
Okay.
Like we get to work with the people who are creating that. And so it could be created at the government level. A lot of state agencies, the US Department of Education has come out with things on this, even some recent Canadian provinces have come out with their own kind of policies, like,
Oh
hey,
boy.
here's
Oh no, Eric. Oh, I hope it doesn't turn into like our healthcare system.
yeah. But I think, like, as you look at it, is it like right now the state policies and the government policies and even like district wide policies, when you get down more to districts, is then even driving down to schools, is you get the broader picture of, hey, what are we concerned about as a big picture, to then really getting down to that narrow picture of what happens in a district or a school, and then ultimately in the classroom. And so it's, how do we, I think, in some ways help educators think through what this is currently in its infancy, and help them understand, like, hey, this is a partner in the work, and there are some things to be concerned about. There's some things to be super excited about, and then there's places where it's like, hey, we need to set up some barriers and parameters around how we use this currently, and maybe even how we're going to use this in the future.
So, and that's kind of, that dives right into more of the AI topic, and some of the questions I have is like, what do you believe? And I know you don't have all the answers, but in 5 years, what does the classroom look like on like a high school level? Going, and maybe to put a little bit more behind that question, I was with you when Valley brought in iPads. Valley Christian was a school in San Jose. I went there. Eric was working there at the time, and they announced that every student would have an iPad in the classroom. Some parents cheered, some parents booed, and it was, I would say it was rocky for the first couple of years of like, how do you get 1,500 students using an iPad in a responsible way? How does the teacher monitor? But then it became a really cool tool, and I think a tool that allowed us to do a ton of different things that we wouldn't be able to do on paper and pen. And it opened us up to the world of the internet, which teachers tapped into. But this, I believe, is a whole nother beast. I mean, it's going to take that and times it by 10. If in your perfect world, 5 years from now, what is, the math teacher in 7th grade classroom look like with this?
Well, it is interesting when you look back at that iPad. Before I got to Valley, I was part of a group that was we implemented iPads 1-to-1 in the first 10 schools in the world.
Wow.
Right. So even before I got to, Valley, which did it a few years after we did it in these other 10 schools, it was that place where, like, I had the experience of being on the front end of something. And that's where I've never been necessarily an expert in technology, but I've always been, in the places that I've worked, an early adopter.
Right.
And I think in that phase, and what I've learned from that lesson, is that the iPad really still is a tool, and it's a technological tool, but I think a lot of people didn't think about it in a way that just replaces the old tools. So they just took the old tools and they made them the new tools, and they didn't really think about, how does this change how we do teaching and learning? How does this change how we do engagement of students and teachers with each other? And so I think where AI has the opportunity to really think different and take the lessons that we learn from something like, 1-to-1 implementation in the classroom, is to really look at it and say, from a fundamental way, is how do we free the teacher up to be that great facilitator of learning, that great guide of relationship that allows the students to, and I think there was this idea, allows them to personalize their learning, and to really dig deep into the places where we know there's expectations and standards, that you got to learn your math, you got to learn how to read, you've got to learn all these things. But then with the AI tools that we now have, and that I think will emerge in the next 5 years, it will put the teacher in more of the position I was as a counselor. Right. Where it's sitting and looking at your progress and where you're at, your hopes, your dreams, the destinations you want to go, and then create the path on how you're best going to get there.
Right.
And I think that, and then use your expertise in your subject matter. I was a high school civics and history teacher for a long time, and there's still expertise that is needed in the classroom from the teacher, but it allows you to then use that expertise in a much more specific way. So if a student's doing really well and they're accelerating through your class, then it's like, hey, I get to use my expertise to help them accelerate even further. If a student's struggling, I can use that expertise to go back and reteach and do some really specific work that allows them. It's almost like tutoring. I get to be the lead tutor in that space. And so when you talk about it like a fifth grade classroom, I just think about my friend's school where he has 100 students in the classroom with one master teacher, two highly qualified teachers, and then they have two teacher aides in that classroom. So fifth grade class, 100 kids in there. And the day that I got to visit, and they're using an adaptive AI math curriculum that allows the student to kind of go at their pace. And the day I was there, I was sitting with a fifth grader who was just kicking his feet up. And he's like, like, it was a Friday, no big deal. I'm like, so what's happening? He's like, well, I just finished my third year of math.
Wow.
And it was only March. And he had finished 3 years of math. And he's like, I talked to my teacher and he said I could take a 15-minute break and then I'm going to go help and tutor some of the other students in class.
Wow.
Because I finished yesterday and I've got today. And he said I could kind of take it today and be a helper. And then I'll start up my fourth year of math on Monday.
I would have been cutting a deal. I'm done at 3 years. Like, you got to get me the hell out of here, Erik.
Yeah. And so you look at on the super great end of that and the positive end of that, you have these teachers that are collaborating in the classroom. You have a master teacher leading the charge and knows where the students are at. You have other teachers, and then you have teachers' aides that are in there doing small group work, that are doing individualized work. And then you have the students like this student, this was an extreme, right? That's just going through and accelerating. In fifth grade, if he's finished 3 years of math, he's going to be in ninth grade, algebra 1 by the end of his fifth grade year.
Right.
And
which
so,
is a gift for that student. Yeah.
Yeah, and allows that student to accelerate rather than be disengaged and bored. But it also puts him in a place, and the brilliance of that teacher was to put him in a place where, you know what, take a day off. You've earned it.
Yeah.
And you get to be a helper.
Yeah.
And to really kind of integrate the community nature of our success. I think that's where, like, ideally, when I look at an experience that I've had where I've seen maybe what the future could look like, that's maybe an early version of what it could look like.
That's so cool. Like, and then you have the flip side, right? Like I was never good at math,
right.
But I probably
your pace.
Yeah, like I would have that pace, that extra time where, maybe I'd sit through history and I'm thinking, what, I'm 3 years ahead, but I feel like I'm held back. I'm just using me as an example about whoever that student is. You had a question on our last.
Some of that, Cale, let me just make this before we go on. And some of it may not be that you weren't good at math.
Yeah.
Right? Because I was in remedial math, all the way through high school and then even into college. It's the realization of, maybe it was just the math classroom and the instructional style and the way we were going about it that didn't fit and wasn't good for me.
Right. And that's where AI could personalize and say, hey, he's more visual, he's more audio, he needs to take breaks, like whatever it is, that can go right to that iPad and give a personalized user experience or education experience to that child. You had mentioned something on our last podcast with Vikram about even at home, like as a parent.
Yeah.
Like, the kids come home.
Yeah, it's tough, like, because, with my kids, though, it's hard for me to help them with, like their calculus homework or whatever. And it's like they're coming home and then I'm becoming a teacher, and I've actually used AI tools to help me with that as well, because I can't. So I'm assuming this is going to help that transition where, that relationship with the teacher is going to be different in AI and your parents are going to be different now.
And hopefully it empowers the parents to empower the kid, right? So it's that place where, and it creates that partnership where, hopefully it's not that place where, hey, go home and get help from your parents. And then you're dependent upon your parents' knowledge. And then we also know in education, right, a parent's comfortability, especially in something like math and reading, then just it relays to the student. So if my parent's not comfortable with something, I actually take that on for myself and become uncomfortable with it. And so it's this place where it's like, hey, how does the parent become an encourager? How does the teacher set up the environment? And then how does the student have a partner in the work that allows them to, accelerate or to get the help that they need and not be stuck in an argument with mom and dad about like, hey, you're too old. We don't do it that way anymore.
Yeah.
Now, if my kids are listening to this, they're going to blame me because they're not good at math.
I don't blame your kids.
I was actually curious, Erik. I was going to ask about technology around this. Like, do you guys develop your own tools around AI? Or are you using third parties to, like, how does that work? Or is it a little bit of both?
Yeah, we don't personally develop our own tools. And I think like when you look at education and when you look at schools, I think what's happened in the last week to 2 weeks with Los Angeles Unified School District with their program, they called it ED. It was an AI chatbot meant to be a tutor. I think it's really instructive for schools as they step into this space as do we want to be developers in this space? Because there's a lot of ed tech companies, ed tech startups. I went to an AI event in San Diego where there's plenty of the work is happening and the development's happening. And so for us as a university or us as, or if I'm thinking of K to 12 schools, should we really step into the development space? Because do we really have the technological expertise and capacity to do what we want to do? And I think it's rather than that. I think what educators need to do is they need to leverage their expertise,
right?
And they need to leverage what they're doing and partner with, the AI and the ed tech companies to better make to better make those tools and those partners in the work. And I think that's where I'm seeing the excitement come from is the idea of and for too long in ed tech it was a lot of people doing this to educators,
right,
to in many ways to teacher proof education. That's been like a mantra of ed tech for 20 some years. And now I think it's that place where it's like, hey, let's partner with teachers, let's partner with educators, let's partner with school leaders, see what they need and see what's going to be effective for them. And that's where I would caution, especially in the early stages of creating your own product. And in LA Unified, I think they're probably there's some things in there that are instructive for us, rather than to over critique them. I think it's just instructive, and then it gives us wisdom as educators of what's the best way forward in this journey.
Well, and I feel like I'm in this space in a couple different projects. Rob's also been in the ed tech space from a marketing standpoint and has been helping on some of the stuff I'm working on. And it's like it's crazy how many ideas and concepts these experts have, but then how hard it is to get schools to buy into that. It's like selling into government, right? It basically is selling into government. Do you feel like, and when we say 3 years or 5 years, and I know some schools are already doing it, you're going to have your first adopters, your private schools, but your government schools, you worked with Chicago School Board or District. Are they going to jump at it, or is this a 10-year thing of like really dotting the I's and crossing the T's and then implementing something? Like, where do you see the timeline?
Yeah, no, I think you're going to see like messy innovation.
Yeah.
where you kind of see the ones who jump into it early and say, hey, we've got issues and we need to solve issues. I think some of the districts that will jump into this, and even why LA Unified was jumping into this, they see the huge learning gaps that occurred during COVID for their students. And it's like, how do we solve this problem and how do we solve it quick? Because we know if we don't solve it quick, we know that like student outcomes for reading and for math will determine a lot of like Los Angeles, Los Angeles area and even California, like even things such as prison size, expectations, or even welfare, or just different things. We know that if we can get kids reading and doing math, our communities flourish in a different way. And so they see it and say, hey, we got to jump into this now. And so there are schools that let's go now because the need is now and we have the opportunity and we'll figure it out as we go. And then you'll get much more of the cautious. Right. And then you'll have some that I think there'll be some schools around the country in particular and around North America that are really, really slow to adopt
Right.
because they're really afraid of of this getting out of their hands, right? So that it is a control issue. You're giving up control, and I think that's why the partnership's so key. Is
Right.
who am I partnering with that can help me understand if this is a good tool or not? And that's where I would encourage like the AI companies and the ed tech companies. How do we know if what you're proposing is actually beneficial or any
Yeah.
good?
Yeah. Don't just like go start developing stuff just to develop it. Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we see that not just in the, Rob and I talk about this all the time. I mean, out of it, just not even ed tech, anywhere. I mean, people start building a 10,000 square foot house with no blueprint, right?
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
goes bad fast. Um,
Well,
so-
and this would be that. So that's an interesting analogy. I'd love to hear your guys' perspective because I don't know if there is a blueprint for this,
Mhm.
right? And so it is. It's like, like we would go to an architect or we would go to the expert. I think this is something where it's like we need to put smart people around the room together.
Right.
And so that maybe that's a question for you guys to get your perspective on what you see as kind of external to what's happening in schools, but very closely related with what's happening in the technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, you kind of hit on it in a different way, right? Is like put smart people in a room and get a bunch of different, feedback. Not the I tell clients all the time, the feedback that you want to hear is not feedback. That's just a cheer squad, and like cheer squads are great, but not when you're writing checks. Like you have to hear from the other perspective of like, we wouldn't implement that, we won't use that, we would use this. And sometimes it's hard for entrepreneurs that are very passionate about their ideas to hear no, or hey, we would rather it this way, when they've already dumped a lot of money the other way or time the other way. And so I think that's key, right? Is being in that room with those smart people and then getting into another room and another room and another room before you just say, hey, this is what everyone's going to want. It's going to be an at-home tutoring thing with a camera, and let's just do it. Everyone's going to love it. I think AI is just so powerful that it's like, hey, actually, maybe not everybody's going to love that, because it can also do these 1,000 other things that everybody else is already working on. And when you take that to market, you're now in a bidding war, and someone like Rob's trying to sell your product against something that's better.
Yeah, and I'm a it doesn't have to be perfect before it's launched kind of guy, and I'm okay building as we go. Like that's more my mentality. Like we're building the plane as we're going. Like
Yeah.
that's sort of our company, like the way that it is, and it's not for everybody, but I think there's so much potential, uncertainty, and then the flip side, we've talked about all the great things. I'm sure there's a lot of the hesitation, challenges, barriers, issues that it brings as well. We hear about, AI hallucinates, and is it pulling real data? Is it not? It's like, so there's that whole side that I think you just got to figure out sometimes, and it's not all going to be perfect, and it's okay. That's just my thought, but I'd be curious as well, Erik, is that area of challenges, barriers, issues that you're seeing, you must see them in your day-to-day, or you're like, oh, that didn't work, or that's going to be. Can you speak a little bit around that side of it?
Well, I think the concerns are probably pretty logical on the front end for educators.
Yeah.
And it's like if we can deal with these concerns on the front end, we can deal with them. And the LA Unified, AI chatbot tutor is a good example, because they didn't shut it down because the chatbot didn't necessarily work. They shut it down because they couldn't control who had access or how access was given to student data. And I think that's sometimes, like from the outside, the tech companies or the tech organizations don't understand the state, the federal, the requirements that schools have to protect and safeguard students.
Right.
And so how are we safeguarding students? How are we doing that well? And then I think the other thing is, like, everybody will go to the cheating side of things. Like, how are we preventing cheating, rather than, I think in the education side of things, we should be talking about how do we ensure that students are doing authentic work.
Right.
Authentic work to them that's leading to wisdom, that's leading to discernment, that's leading to character, that's leading to understanding, so that they can do deeper work and do that deeper work for themselves. And that's where then, even like in some of it, where if we can in education, I think probably get a little lazy in this, where
Yeah.
it's like, we'll rely on the AI. And then there's a report that came out today where they put a bunch of college essays. They were doing research on college essays, and they put a few thousand college essays through Chat GPT, the newest version, to see how it would assess based on the rubric these student essays for colleges. And what they found was in the scoring of them compared to the human scoring of them, there was an anti-Asian bias towards them. And so I think that's something that we have to really think about in our technology and in this AI is, how do we safeguard students? How do we, create authentic work, that we can know is authentic work to the student? And then how do we, prevent our own biases, but then how do we prevent the inbuilt biases, and they don't know where this came from or how it happened, but technology, we know over the years, has the biases built in of, wherever the programming comes from. And so how do we deal with that so that then as educators, we don't get lazy and then just turn it over to the AI, where it's like, hey, we're going to use this AI to help us do better work for students and with students. And I think so, like, if you think about that from an educational perspective, and you think about it from the sense of, I think about it a little bit more. The other flip I would make for people to think about is what is going to allow the teacher to be more effective and more efficient
Right.
in their relationship with the student and with their classroom, compared to, I think a lot of people are looking at AI and say, how are the students using it? I think if I was a school leader currently, I'd be looking at how can we use this as adults
Right.
to make ourselves in the classroom and in the school more effective, more efficient, and create those levels of engagement.
Well, we even heard that from Vikram. Like, Vikram came in, he was one of the students we brought that had just graduated. And he's like, it's surprising to me how even professors are all in or they're all out on AI. It's like, yep, I want it, I'll use it, it's going to be great. Or if they bring it, I'm quitting, I'm done. This is, bullshit. It's going to take my job, right? Like, it's just like so spread right now. There's no middle ground. And I think it's going to be school and leaders like yourselves' responsibilities to find that middle ground, to realize, hey, teachers, maybe you're becoming more of leadership coaches in the classroom instead of just peer educators. You're still an educator, but you're also going to find little Jimmy's passion earlier on and push them that way, and empower them more than just a whiteboard and, hey, I'm going to teach you algebra today. And I think going back to cheating, kids recognize, right, when a teacher comes in and says, all right, the lesson plan for this week is a 12-page essay with 47 citations, and I'll be at the front, scrolling on my computer or grading tests. I think that as I got and I progressed, and it didn't happen as much for me, but as I progressed in my education, I knew that, right? I said, I know this teacher's being lazy right now. And so when you realize when a teacher's being lazy, which is normal, I mean, they have a long year, as a student, you feel like, hey, I'm not going to give it all my all, or I'm going to find a workaround, or I'm going to cheat on this. And I agree with you. I think AI can become that creative juice for that teacher to say, hey, here's something I could do instead that still gives me a little time to rest and catch up on grading or whatever it is that I need to do in the classroom, but is more powerful for Cale and Rob and whoever else that are in the classroom sitting there going, well, why are we doing this? And I totally agree with that.
Well, I think it's being honest, right?
Right.
It's being honest with ourselves. What AI has opened the door to is like us as educators of how much meaningless work do we give our students?
Yeah.
And I look back at it as when I was a classroom teacher, I was challenged on some of that. No, it's all important. It's all important. And then, as I got older and more mature and more humble, it's like, no, what is the meaningful work? What's the authentic and honest work, and how do we humble ourselves to have those conversations? And what AI has done is saying, hey, you know what, like, what is meaningful? And then how are we just honest about how we got to the place of completing our work, right? Did we have support? Did we, even to me as a teacher, like, hey, we're working on some things at the university where we're giving we're taking some of our courses and we're using a program to test out some of this just for our own purposes, where you upload the rubric for the essay, you upload the essay, and then you ask the program to give you a first kind of run through of the feedback, not a grade. You're not doing just feedback based on the rubric for the student. And so we're seeing what, we're testing ourselves out against what the AI can do. And then it's telling our students like, hey, here's our feedback.
Right.
And then here's the AI feedback. And
being transparent
the goal,
with it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the goal is to say, hey, you know what, here you're seeing different feedback and maybe even a little bit different perspective on that feedback. But the goal is to get you to a place of saying, hey, you know what, this is your work, this is your learning. How do we go deeper? How do we think more complexly about it? And then how do we get to a place where it's like, hey, you know what, here are the partners. Here's my teacher. Here's the AI program that we're using. Here's this. And let's be honest that like wisdom doesn't come by ourselves. And so how do we cultivate the wisdom of living people and then the technology to be able to say, hey, you know what, we've come up with better assessments and critiques and analysis of whatever we're working on.
Right.
Do you think there's in our lifetime, the classroom's going to look different though? Is Optimus going to be at the front teaching at a university, or are we going to be sitting at home taking all our class? Like, is that far-fetched to say that, or is that a reality that in the next 30, 40 years that it's, the classroom's going to look completely different than what it looks like today?
I hope so. In 1992, I was sitting in a classroom with one of the most innovative teachers I've ever met. I'll give him a shout out. His name's Scott Roloffs in the Chicagoland area. Innovative teacher. He's a legend in the Chicagoland area. And in 1992, my senior year in high school, I remember him telling me that the classroom of the future is going to look totally different than the classroom of today. And I wasn't even interested in being a teacher at that time. And I still remember that. And you know what? And if you walked into a classroom today, it would probably look quite similar to 1992 when I was a senior in high school. And maybe even before that. I do think, and I agree 100%, this has the potential to free us from the structures that have inhibited us from being innovative, from personalizing, from creating these spaces. I think what COVID did is it gave us the essential nature that we need people, we need mentors, we need guides, we need adults in our life, but we also need classmates, we need community. And so it's how do we pair kind of that idea of the technical and the technology with the human and the physical, and how do we pair that, and how do then we create a place where, you know what, teaching as a profession is life-giving, and then learning as a student is also life-giving in the fullest and complete way. And I think people are beginning to reimagine that in significant ways, and I think there's some beautiful things happening. I think COVID started us on this, and then the AI stuff just amplifies it and just lets us go running. Because like even that kid, my nephew, he came out of COVID and he's like, I can do this by myself. I don't need school. And his dad travels the world and stuff, so he travels the world with his dad and does online school.
Yeah,
right.
Which is great, right?
Like awesome.
Yeah. But his two sisters needed to be in the school environment.
Well, and I think so, just to kind of wrap it up on that point, like we even talk about, like we talked about with Vikram, like my education experience versus Rob's versus Vikram's. But I believe that the biggest change around Rob's education versus mine, which is years apart, not to date you, Rob, like decades apart.
Backhand right there. What?
The difference was Rob probably came home and played with his friends outside and rode the bus home with everybody or whatever you did, where we come home and we open Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok and we text and we talk about whoever over the phone without them being there. And I think that taking that away, that go play street hockey or go shoot hoops on the way home from school, and then taking away everything else that you still have, all of a sudden these kids have never talked to someone. They've never had to meet a friend in person. They're on Zoom. I mean, Erik, my biggest value from high school was, leadership and speaking in front of the class and speaking in front of the school and doing those things that had nothing to do with math or science. If you took those away from me, I don't think I'd be where I am today. I think I learned more from that. And I think that that's something that AI is going to have to sort out, is like, okay, great. Maybe we can do school from home, but how do we get these kids to interact so they can walk into an office and shake someone and look them in the eye?
Yeah. Well, and we know, human fulfillment comes through connection, right? And I think this is the opposite challenge that we're dealing with since we've kind of innovated and figured it out. Like, as we've got this technological revolution that we think can change significantly how we do school, how we do teaching and learning, how we create that, it does open up the space for the human. But we also know that on the same side, the technology, especially the smartphone, social media, is not good for kids. And so, it's this interesting place of, as we have a technological revolution, we're also, and this is happening in Canada and all across the United States, is where, hey, we're banning phones in school, right? And we're banning some technologies because we know, to your point, Cale, and Rob, you and I are at that place where it's like we didn't have to grow up in this space of, what's the normalcy of childhood and of relationship and really the big thing that I think has been lost, especially in schools, but in general, is the idea of play and social play, where it's like you learn to kind of like live within community, and you learn to live within society, which was, Cale, going back to your days, was an incredible strength and was probably the center of your education, and then the rest of it just got built around it.
Right. Which is huge. Yeah. Well, Erik, we if people are listening and they want to get in touch with you, you're on LinkedIn, right? It's at Erik Ellefsen.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will want to be connected, especially with, a leader in the United States. I know Canada's education is probably similar to where the US is, but, people are really excited about this in BC, in Kelowna, in Canada. And our listeners have asked us to keep going down the AI and education path, and they want to learn more. Parents, teachers, students, and we really appreciate you coming on and shedding some professional light.
Yeah, thanks, Erik. It's been good discussion, fun.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Cale.
Cheers.
Thanks, Erik.
Cheers.